Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a source with a pretty radical idea. What if the answers to some of the biggest questions in modern cosmology, like what really happens inside a black hole, weren't new at all? What if they were actually written down in ancient spiritual texts thousands of years ago?
So here's the central claim from our source material, and it's a big one. It says that the building blocks of our existence, we're talking matter and life, actually come from the void of a black hole. Yeah, it's a bold statement for sure. It's trying to build this incredible bridge between the physics of the cosmos and the spirituality of creation.
So you're probably asking, how does the source even begin to build that bridge? Well, it starts by looking at one of the biggest mysteries in science, the black hole, and basically claims the answers have been right there, waiting for us, in ancient spiritual traditions this whole time.
Okay, so you've got these two totally different ways of looking at it, right? On one side, you have science, which sees a black hole as this huge unsolved puzzle. It's a point of infinite density, they call a singularity. But then, on the other side, the source points us to ancient Indian spiritual texts. And these texts, it claims, talk about the center of the galaxy as the Krishna River, the actual origin point of a divine consciousness. The argument here is that these aren't two different things. They're just two descriptions of the same phenomenon. To really build this case, the source takes us all the way back to the very first moments of the universe. Science tells us about the Planck epoch and then the Grand Unification epoch. And you have to understand, these are timescales so incredibly, unbelievably small. We're talking fractions of a second, they're practically zero.
And this is where the source makes a crucial point. It argues that the reason science can't really probe these earliest moments is because scientists are looking for matter. But according to this view, matter hadn't even formed yet. All that existed back then were what the source calls non-matter components, just pure, formless energies.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. The theory starts building into this grand cosmic narrative. The source takes those formless energies we were just talking about and maps them directly onto divine figures from Hindu cosmology.
Before we go further, let's just do a quick science refresher. The Planck epoch. What is it? Well, it's that very first tiny sliver of a moment where scientists believe all the fundamental forces of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, all of it, were just one single unified energy. It's pretty much the theoretical starting point of, well, everything.
And here it is, the first major link this source draws. It proposes that this one single unified energy from the Planck epoch is the emergence of the deity Vishnu, who then acquires time and space, basically setting the stage for the galaxy to exist.
Then, as the universe kept expanding into what's called the Grand Unification epoch, that single energy, it splits apart. The source suggests we can think of this split as an analogy where four divine forms emerged from that one. You've got Vishnu representing bliss, Brahma as the soul, Mahesh as the mind, and Lakshmi as pure energy.
So you take those four components together, bliss, soul, mind, and energy, and the source gives them a collective name, life energy. And then it makes another huge jump. It argues that this spiritual idea of life energy is basically the same thing as what scientists call the singularity, that infinitely dense point where the entire universe began.
All right, so we've been talking on this massive cosmic scale. Now, we're going to zoom all the way in, down to the subatomic world. Because here, the source draws some even more specific and, frankly, wild parallels, this time between quantum particles and a whole pantheon of goddesses.
So according to the spiritual story being told here, you start with that primary energy, Lakshmi. She then gives rise to two more, wisdom, which is Saraswati, and power, which is Parvati. Now you have these three primary forces, and they interact with each other in three different ways. And what do you get? A total of 9 fundamental divine energies, which are known as the Navdurga.
And get this. Here's where the source draws another really striking parallel. In the world of particle physics, there's this thing called the CKM matrix. And what does it do? It describes how fundamental particles interact in, you guessed it, 9 distinct ways. So the source claims this isn't a coincidence. It's a scientific echo of the spiritual truth represented by the 9 powers of Navdurga.
This brings us to a really famous concept you might have heard of from some spiritual traditions, the idea of 330 million deities. I mean, that number is just impossibly huge, right? But the source we're looking at offers a completely different way to think about it.
And this is a truly radical reframing of that number.
The source proposes that 330 million deities has nothing to do with gods, not at all. Instead, it suggests this was an ancient way of trying to describe the mind-boggling complexity happening inside a single atom. All those countless particles and interactions zipping around at the subatomic level.
Okay, so from that tiny, tiny subatomic world, the theory zooms way back out again, and this time it offers up an analogy for life itself, comparing the entire universe to a computer.
Here's how the analogy works. Think of the physical universe, all the stars, planets, everything we can see, as the hardware. But running on that hardware is an invisible software. That's what the source calls life energy, or God. In this system, the soul is like the operating system. The mind is the RAM, and energy is the network that connects it all together.
And it doesn't stop there. The source then starts assigning roles to some of the biggest mysteries in cosmology. You know, all that stuff scientists are still trying to figure out? The Higgs field, the thing that gives particles mass, that's equated with cosmic bliss. Antimatter, that's the cosmic soul. Dark matter becomes the cosmic mind, and dark energy is cosmic energy. And altogether, according to the source, these invisible forces create a massive network of divine consciousness that runs through the entire universe.
And finally, after all this cosmic and subatomic exploration, the source brings this entire story right down to the human level. It proposes a direct link between the singularity of a black hole and the code that's hidden inside our very own DNA. The argument is actually pretty elegant. Just like a black hole contains all the formless potential needed to create an entire universe, a simple biological seed contains all the formless potential to create a living being. So the seed is presented as a tiny physical version of the cosmos, a microcosm of the macrocosm. And to make that final connection absolutely explicit, the source maps those 4 divine energies we talked about earlier directly onto the 4 nucleobases, the chemical letters A, T, C, and G that make up our genetic code. So in this view, thymine represents bliss, adenine is the soul, cytosine is the mind, and guanine is energy. It's all right there in our DNA. And so we're left with this really powerful final parallel. On one side, you have the black hole's singularity, which gives birth to the physical hardware of an entire universe. And on the other, according to the source, you have the human seed's singularity, its unique DNA code, which gives birth to a person's entire dream world, their reality, their potential, everything.
So when you step back and look at everything we've covered, the source material we've explored today is doing something pretty unique. It's borrowing the vocabulary of physics, words like singularities, epochs, and particles, to tell a deeply spiritual story about the cosmos. And it leaves us with a really compelling question to think about. What happens when the language of science is used to tell a spiritual story? It's just a fascinating look at the intersection of 2 very different but very powerful ways of trying to understand our world.